Okay, so welcome to another TouchDesigner Meetup. It's lovely to have you all here. And this one is gonna be about system architecture or the art of making functional and efficient and flexible and just beautiful systems and components. And yeah, I have some really lovely presenters about this topic or for this topic here with me. So we've got Alan Hammer, who is doing who's an artist on one hand, a wonderful artist, and on the other hand, he's doing this visual cast, like the podcast series. So if you haven't checked that out, definitely check that out. And I hope to be on there soon as
Yeah,
well.
you better.
Yeah. And then we got Stefan Kraus, who is here in Berlin as well. He's one of the main part of the Node Institute. If you haven't heard of that, definitely check that out. They got some lovely workshops and roundtables in Berlin and all these kind of things. And then we got Matthew Ragan, which I think doesn't need a big introduction. One of the biggest names in the scene, I would say. Also, how I got into TouchDesigner, actually watching his videos. So I'm very happy that he's on here answering some of our questions and sharing his experience. Yeah.
Is there a TouchDesigner user that hasn't watched his videos that uses TouchDesigner? I don't think so. And if there is, then go watch his videos. Right?
Right. So as usual, we'll just go through the free presentations one after the other, and then we'll switch to the meetup room one, so you can ask your questions. So if you have any questions, the audience, if you have any questions, please just note them down and ask them later when we're in the different format in the second half. Yeah. So my name is Bileam Tschepe. I'm also based in Berlin, and I will be your host for today. And I think without further ado, we can get started with Alan Hammer. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Awesome. Sorry. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you, Billiam, for setting this all up. It's really awesome. So I'm going to talk a little bit about MagicBox, which is a company that I work for. It's essentially a virtual production company, but it's kind of special, and I'm going to show a quick video. And I think that will explain why it's special, and then going to talk a little bit about my role and kind of why this is relevant to
Are
us.
you ready for a complete transformation of your
Can you guys hear
production
that?
process and to unlock endless creative possibilities?
Yeah, we can hear
Whether
that.
you're on the go or in a fixed location, the MagicBox Mobile Virtual Production Super Studio empowers you with a fully equipped LED studio right at your fingertips. This is the future of virtual production. MagicBox is packed with cutting-edge virtual production technology to unlock limitless creative possibilities for movies, TV, commercials, music videos, and experiential events. This is the one tool with the power to take your creativity to new heights. The Computer Control Center inside MagicBox runs industry-standard game engine and video playback workflows, so you can quickly send photorealistic 3D environments and real-world video content onto the LED walls. MagicBox has 1.3 pixel pitch LED walls and ceiling to provide a seamless, high-resolution backdrop for your productions, transporting your talent or audience to any location you can imagine. The articulating ceiling can be lowered and tilted to create the perfect reflections off glass and metallic surfaces. And the motorized turntable floor expands the dimensionality of this LED volume beyond boundaries. From breathtaking landscapes to everyday interiors, the MagicBox Super Studio brings your vision to life. MagicBox gives you the ability to create stunning and immersive content when you need it, where you need it. About 30 minutes after it arrives, it is transformed from a semi-trailer into a fully operational LED studio ready for your production. The efficiencies and cost savings created by the MagicBox Super Studio will complement any scale production. Just imagine the possibilities. From Hollywood blockbusters to live TV to corporate productions, the MagicBox Super Studio delivers this incredible technology anywhere you need it to be. With MagicBox, you have the power to unleash your imagination, break creative boundaries, and make your visions come to life. It's time to think inside the box. It's time for MagicBox.
All right. So, MagicBox, I'll talk a little bit about MagicBox and a little bit about myself. And for those who don't know, virtual production is essentially a way of shooting in camera VFX. And it basically allows you to create real-time VFX in camera. So you don't have to shoot on a green screen and then do post-production. You can shoot everything in camera. A lot of technologies involved in it. And MagicBox, as you can see, is pretty unique because it's a mobile version of this kind of technology. It's been very successful. In the video, it's a very old video. They had Pixera running, and this is kind of before I joined the company and integrated TouchDesigner to be the back end and front end of the system. Yeah, so I joined the company a year ago, and a little bit about myself. I started off as a film student, then became a VJ, during the pandemic, I kind of shifted. I had a lot of clients in the corporate world and a lot of clients in the commercial world and the music video world. Excuse me. From making content for them, real-time content, and they all shifted to virtual production because that's the only thing that could be done during COVID. So I shifted to virtual production as well. And I had already been pretty deep in Unreal at that point. So the shift was very easy for me because most of virtual production, at least the content side, is done in Unreal Engine. So I just got thrown into this whole world. And kind of as I was doing it, I realized that there's a lot of things missing in terms of architecture, in terms of systems, in terms of media servers and this kind of stuff. So I started kind of pushing TouchDesigner into this whole workflow, and TouchDesigner started releasing a lot of really useful nodes for camera tracking and different types of syncing things and a few other things like monitor DATs and things like this. So it was a really nice synergy. And about a year ago, I started working for MagicBox. We met at I got hired as a freelancer, and then just kind of showed the CEO kind of like what is possible to do, and he was very interested. And since then, we've removed all of Pixera and other media server things and ingested TouchDesigner as the front end back end, and it's obviously really powerful. Another anecdote before I jump into the project is before I got hired by MagicBox, I started developing a kind of like the idea was an easy to use, anybody can use it, virtual production suite of tools. And I was calling it VP Flow. And I was kind of taking a lot of what I learned in the past 4 years and ingesting it into a kind of software suite of tools. And it was going to be kind of like, a web GUI that connects to a back end of TouchDesigner, and it's all automatic and automated and things like this. So a lot of the tools that I was developing, I was using them on MagicBox, and that was kind of a lot of the reason, or I don't know if a lot of the reason, but one of the reasons that I was hired, hopefully not a lot of the reason, but one of the reasons that I got hired was because I had already kind of established this really nice workflow and suite of tools. I kind of have been slowly taking those tools from a automated anybody could use it to a very like specific use case for MagicBox. So okay, so that's one part of it. The second part is that virtual production, obviously, as you saw, it requires like a lot of technology, and I'm not in the truck right now. I know that would be cool if I pushed a button and it would reveal that I'm in the truck. That would be really cool, but I'm not, unfortunately. And so I had to kind of mess around with the project to be able to work without the truck, and work without camera tracking and work without an output. So bear with me. There are some things that are a little bit clunky. And also, this is my whip project. So It's not what I deploy in MagicBox. It's basically what I deploy in MagicBox. It just has a lot of a little bit of added functionality that I'm kind of where I'm crossing my old projects into this new MagicBox projects. And I wanted to show this one because it has some added, excuse me, it has some added system architecture stuff in it. So with that being said, I'm going to jump in here. I'm going to share my screen again. I'm also really happy to answer lots of any questions that you have about virtual production in general and XR and AR. So feel free to ask those in the right time. So there's two projects to this. One is a control project, which is this, and the other one is a kind of the master launch project. Now, the nice thing about this is that I have it organized in a way that you just press a button on a Stream Deck, and the Stream Deck opens up this project and then launches the main project. And the reason I'm launching it from here is because I need to launch it in a certain way that has the right affinity, NVIDIA affinity, because the servers that we have multiple GPUs. So you have to force TouchDesigner to run in a certain affinity, GPU monitor 0. So I run it from here, and basically it's a one-click solution. So I click on the Stream Deck one button, it launches this launches the main project, which is this one, and it also launches a iPad GUI for the client. So when this launches, it looks like this, and I made it small, obviously, so we can see two things at once. And this kind of is what you'll be seeing in the MagicBox control room. And these pips also get sent to like a bigger TV, so you can have them side by side with like the camera capture. So the camera that's in the studio is also sending their pips, and we can kind of see what the camera sees. We also have like a security monitor, so I can kind of see what's going on in the truck outside of the camera perspective. And this is a little bit of a visualizer, so we can actually see what's happening on the wall and the ceiling, and also kind of a little bit of a visualizer of like each piece of content individually. Sorry, I have something stuck in my throat. So yeah, I don't really feel like there's much need to show off this project. It's pretty straightforward. It's just a lot of buttons and kind of like little switches here, and a lot of content ingestion from the main project. But maybe we'll jump into it as well. What I really wanted to show off is kind of this main project. And I'm going to start with the media. So VP Flow, when it started out, I kind of had a need to have the ability to have media displayed in a virtual production setting. And to do that, because virtual production works in a very specific way, which is essentially you have servers sending out content to LED volume. And in some cases, you even have multiple servers sending out to, you have one server sending out to this part of the wall, one to this, and one to this, and one to this. In MagicBox, we have 5 servers, but they're all doing different things. And we, what's the right word? Condense everything into one server because they're running very strong GPUs. And even though this is a very high pixel count, I think it's 15. What is it? It's 15,360 by 2160. Because it's only doing media, the A6000 has a very high VRAM, is able to do it. For Unreal, we split it up into 2 servers so we can get a little bit more bandwidth. But yeah, so for VP Flow, I had this need to make a media engine. And that's kind of what I had here, where you can kind of see there's this little like window here where I can kind of select different medias and kind of have them be displayed on the wall. And that was kind of like the original setup of it. I actually should shout out Daniel Molnar. He helped me develop this script and tool to basically take the lower level controls and push them to the top level so I can actually control the media from here. And if you see, like, I'm moving it across the volume, ooh, frame rate's not happy. Now, these tools I never ingested into my MagicBox project because we never needed them. 90% of our clients were kind of creating content made for the wall, as you see here. And I'll just show like a quick video of what that looks like. This was a thing we did for Pittsburgh sports teams. So they, created content that worked for the screens, and all they were doing was basically switching between different content pieces. So there was never really a need to have like full media server controls, which is why I kind of never, I wanted this to be very simple for people to use. I didn't want to add more complexity. That's changing now, and there is a need to kind of bring back this kind of old ability to, manipulate media, whether it's just all the kind of fun stuff. And I also developed, and I'm gonna jump into it in a second, a tool to blend between multiple different medias individually. So if I can, I don't know why this is running so slow. I'm sorry. This is running on my desktop, and I think the Discord is also not helping it very much. But essentially, you have the ability to blend between multiple different layers. And for that, I had a developer called Vinay. I forgot his last name, but I will get it in a moment, who helped me write a nice GLSL script for that as well. So yeah, you have the ability to kind of switch between a radio selection where you can kind of switch between, different clips. And when I give it to the client, they have like a little iPad UI that they can literally just click and switch between clips. And they love this because it's like, they don't have to think about anything. They're just like, oh, I want this clip, put it on. Normally they would have a radio and they would be like, hey, Alon, can you change it to clip 4? And I'm like, oh, okay, fine. Well, I didn't say that to them, obviously, but that's what I was feeling inside. So giving them this iPad UI was very useful for this kind of, content-oriented workflow. And I can control that from here. The way that I send it to them is through a VNC. So the iPad has a VNC open, and I have a virtual monitor that I open up this iPad GUI onto. It works really well. Yeah, I was really happy with how that worked. Yeah, so they have the option to do either radio, where they can switch between clips, or selection, which I showed before. And I'm going to jump into this media library quickly to show kind of how it works, because I think it's a very nice solution for media ingestion and media kind of, I would say, compositing. So it starts off with a replicator that gets shoved into this comp over here. And based on what folder we basically are looking at here, it gets populated. And it's very quickly and simply has a playback control, which I can control from here. So I can pause it. Obviously, it doesn't work now for the demo, but it does work. You can pause it and control the clip start and end. You can control the clip rate if you want to play backwards, and you can also replay the clip. That's kind of over here controlled with some chop logic. And then there is a little bit of a logic here to see if it's an image or if it's a video, to kind of save on performance. So if it's a video, then it kind of doesn't bypass a lot of things. If it is an image, it bypasses a lot of the playback logic, which I think is actually what's causing the problem here. I might just force it to shift between the different media libraries. That might help. See if that makes a difference here. I think that might help with this. No, I don't know why the performance is so choppy. Okay. Well, either way, yeah. So then that gets ingested into this replicator over here. And each one of these gets sent to this GLSL multi, which essentially controls, it's a very basic script, but very useful and works really nicely, where essentially there's two arrays that are being sent to it. One array is kind of the blend mode. So each one of these has a blend mode. And then that gets sent as an array into the GLSL, which is kind of over here, the different blend modes. And then it also has an index order, which is the more convoluted version part of this, but it's very needed because if you have, you know, 4 different clips that are running in different blend modes, you want to be able to control, you know, the different blending between them. So if I want to have like, you know, this one on top and this one on bottom, I need to be able to control the order of them. Let's see if I can show that quickly without having this slow down so much. So I just make this bigger. So you kind of see that this isn't an add mode, but if I make it over, then it's going to be over that clip. And then I can also move it up and down based on its order. Maybe I make this over as well so we can see that more clearly. So I can move it and kind of see over here. If I zoom in here, I can change the order of the blend modes. Now, without this GLSL patch, I would have to have some convoluted comp logic that each one has a composition and is compositing over each other, and it would be very difficult to have a replicator for it. So the solution that I found was kind of this GLSL solution. And the way that I'm switching the order is a little bit crazy, but it works. So as you saw, these replicators, these clones, each have this kind of data DAT table that has their info for resolution. It has their sample rate. It has a little toggle for if they're XR enabled or not. It has their file, their path, their length, and what frame they're currently running at. That gets all sent out into a master parameter, media parameter DAT. That is being selection logicked and blending ID'd. So the first step of this is to take the selection, if it's selected or not. So if I click on it, you can see over here, it gets selected. And I have this override here so that you can actually select in here as well as from the GUI. And it can, you can have like an override kind of happening. So if somebody is inside of this project, they can select it. Originally, this was split up to 2 computers, so this was very needed. You had the control system in a main computer and this on another computer. So I wanted to have the ability to have an operator and a user be able to select things. So that's why there's this override little thing here. Then that gets sent to a chop, and this is kind of where the convolutedness begins. Because GLSL doesn't work with, I don't know the exact term, but it needs to have a 0 for its first item. I had to kind of give new IDs to these IDs. And because replicators, I'm using a lot of logic for their numberings, I needed to keep it at a 1 and not a 0. So I had to kind of convert their namespace to, instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now that gets kind of sent into here, and then I have a new list that has the new blend ID and the selection with the overrides, and then that gets over here to selection. And if you see, the only ones that are selected here are the ones that I have selected on my GUI, and because it's paused, it's a little bit clunky, but it still kind of somehow sends it even though it's paused. And then that is what I'm using as my array inside of my GLSL multi to kind of decide what the order is. And the way that the order gets shifted is a very, again, clunky tool, but it works, where I can, each one of these clips, let me just open this here. Each one of these clips has a move up and move down button. And if I click the move up and move down button, it moves them up literally on this list, on this blend table over here. Let's see if I can press play. It moves it up and down on this blend table, so you can kind of see they're moving up and down. The order of them are moving up or down. Maybe do this one. I don't know which one's selected right now. I think this, yeah, moves up and down based on the order that is there. So that's kind of the media tools. You know, that's basically how it works in a nutshell. There's a little bit more stuff inside of the script that Dan wrote, but I don't think I'm going to jump into that because it's very specific. All it really does is, well, not all it does, not to diminish it. It's a very, very nice tool. But what it does is it looks at the parameters of these replicators and then creates new parameters on this comp over here and binds them as well. So that was very important for me for the VP flow to have like very organized things, so I don't have to go into networks. Especially if when I was building the web GUI, I wanted to have everything on the top level. So besides for content, we also do driving plates, which is a very big part of our business. And over here, you can kind of switch the GUI to driving plates, and I'll switch the folder. This is definitely not going to run smooth because this is kind of a lot of it's about 9 different 4K streams running at once. And I'm only running on the 3090 here, so it's kind of having a hard time with it. But essentially what driving plates are, they're plates where you have like, you know, you have like a frontal, side, corner, back, side, corner, frontal corner of videos from a car being driven, and it gives you the ability to have driving plates. So you kind of put a car, I think in the video we saw that, you have a car here and you can kind of just shoot as if you're driving it. Very effective. We've done multiple commercials for very high-end car makers, and we're getting more and more, so it's working really well. And what I did here was build a very simple ingestion system where you can kind of have a bank of 2 clips. You know, you can switch between A and B, which is all you really need because they're never switching in shooting. And Bileam, tell me if I'm running over my time here, please. But essentially, we have the ability to switch, you know, clips, and it switches all of them at once. Same kind of playback logic here, and a little bit of a blending system that I never fully finished, but it kind of gives you the ability to blend each individual clip. So you can kind of do like a live stitch of all of these clips. And then I'm basically, excuse me, I'm reprojecting these clips onto my volume. So I have each one of these clips is inside of a light, and I'm reprojecting them onto the mesh of the volume. And you kind of see that the way that the lights are set up is the same way that they were captured. So this is actually drivingplates.com, which is a vendor we work with a lot, and they have a specialized car that has a camera in this configuration, and reprojecting them in the same way made sense to me. So that's being reprojected onto the volume, and then kind of taking that out and ingesting it on. I also have like a little switcher here for if they want to do like sometimes they have a request to do like you know, like a green screen plate. It's yellow for some reason, which is weird. Oh, I guess because of this. But yeah, they have the ability to do like a green screen plate if they want to like have like a backup shot of something like that, or somebody asked us to do like a timer, so we could do like a timer time back where they, you know, 3, 2, 1, and then they press play on the clip if there's like, you know, controls or something like that. And that works really nicely. And then what I kind of built for it, excuse me, was the ability to switch the perspective. So I don't know if you saw in the truck, there is this turntable where you can kind of turn a car on a turntable. So you kind of see there's a car with a turntable. So they don't have to change their setup of their camera. Obviously, it's a small volume as well. You want to pretty much always be shooting that way towards the back wall. So they can just turn the car, and then if we turn the footage, then if I can get this to run a little bit smoother. Oh. See if I shorten the clip, maybe that will help. We can kind of just flip the footage to run, you know, from the left or from the back, et cetera, and that makes it a very smooth and easy switch for the you know, for the shoot. And obviously in Hollywood and commercials, time is money. So it's very important to be able to do things fast. You know, most media servers would have you have to switch out the clips or make presets for each one. Here it's a very, like, it doesn't matter what the array of the driving plates are, you can kind of very easily just switch from different perspectives. So it's very a nice addition to our work set of tools. How much time do I have left, Bileam?
None actually. But you can do
Okay.
2 or 3 more minutes if you like.
Okay, I'll jump quickly into XR. It's a
Okay.
very hard thing to show without having a volume, so I'll just give a quick overview. Now, essentially, what I started building here was the most impressive part of it is the set extension, and I'll just show it quickly what that means. So this is an old studio that I worked at a few years ago, where I kind of started developing a lot of these tools. You can kind of see there's a volume here and there's a ceiling. So, you know, if we pull the camera up above the volume and we get to the ceiling, then there's no virtual world there. What do? We do set extension. So set extension allows you to, and I'll just show kind of what it looks like quickly. Set extension allows you to extend your physical set to the virtual space. Now you can kind of see there's a blend here. It gets a little bit darker. That's where the physical space would end and the virtual begins. I'll show a little bit more of a better example here where you can kind of see it a lot more better. So, you know, the background here is being projected onto the wall. And then once the camera tilts upwards, we're kind of in a virtual overlay. So this is kind of nice. It's seamless, works pretty well. You can kind of see where the blend is here. This was, you know, kind of, again, like a work in progress that I was working at that studio. Yeah, I mean, the way that it works is very straightforward. Essentially, I have a little test scene in here to kind of just show some virtual. And obviously, because I don't have a camera, I'm ingesting the virtual camera into here. But essentially, what we'd be doing is we'd have a virtual representation of the space. So as you saw before, this is kind of what the volume looks like, and I'm just extending the volume in virtual space. And I'm essentially doing the same thing I'm doing for the media, where I'm reprojecting it onto the volume. And I'm reprojecting onto the volume what the virtual camera sees, which is essentially what it's seeing in the 3D scene, in this case, that test scene that I'm showing. And I'm overlaying those two on top of each other. And you can kind of see here, I did like a little bit of a fake levels. You can kind of see, okay, this is where the, and I also have this fake projection, fake camera tracking thing here, where I can kind of, let me also just kill this so we can get some of our performance back. That's already killed. Let me just kill this one. Okay, so normally in virtual production, you have camera tracking, you have data coming in from the camera. So here I'm just kind of like doing it with these sliders to show. And you can kind of see here now we have a frustrum. In virtual production, a frustrum is kind of what the camera sees. The camera is only seeing this purple part. And if you see here, so now I'm looking only at the virtual, or I'm only looking at the physical stage, right? And it would be a physical stage with a LED volume. And then once I start going above the stage, oh, all of a sudden we have, you know, black. We don't have anything. You can kind of see here, you know, in this studio, we have a ceiling, so it kind of has it, but there's all these holes here. So that's where set extension comes in. and it essentially creates a virtual representation of the stage. It's essentially augmented reality, but the augmented reality is very, very, very specific to fill in this one thing. And just a quick overview of this. I have a little bit of a blending happening here to give it a blend between the virtual and the physical. And I have a light that's attached to my camera that is basically reprojecting what the camera sees onto, in this case, the virtual representation of the stage. And then if this was a camera feed, it would be coming in as a camera feed. I'm overlaying it on top. And I'm leaving out a lot of steps of like camera distortion and lens distortion and things like that. That TouchDesigner have a bunch of different nodes that work with camera tracking. So they have NCAM, they have Stipe, they have Moses, and they also have, obviously, just like, the normal lens distortion that you can use. That is the most tricky part of this whole thing, is kind of getting those distortions to work. Obviously here it's virtual and virtual, so it aligns beautifully, but in a normal case, it does not align beautifully. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done to kind of match, to kind of distort the virtual representation of the set extension to the physical distorted through the lens of the virtual. And
Okay,
I think that's where I'm gonna end.
have to stop you here. Yeah.
Yeah, good timing.
Nice. All right, thank you so much. That's a quick overview of a very large project. It's really great to see. One thing I didn't understand. So you got hired by the MagicBox, and you built this from scratch for them, or was that already?
So yeah, I built this from scratch, and I kind of ingested some tools that I was working on for the past few years into this project. I kind of have a little bit of a ethical thing, whereas if I'm developing tools somewhere else, I try to start again. But the mine stuff that I've kind of accumulated is mine, right? It's proprietary to me, of like what my mind came up with. So I kind of take the tools that I had developed and just kind of rebuild them or repackage them into a new project. So the media ingestion, the set extension, the XR stuff is stuff that I already had developed, but I kind of rebuilt them for MagicBox. And then the GUI and the driving plates and the specific media ingestion I built from scratch for MagicBox as well.
I see. Impressive. Thank you. So yeah, we'll get back to you later in the meetup rooms. So for anybody in the audience, if you have any questions, please note them down. We'll come back to questions later. And we'll continue now with Stefan from the Node Institute and his presentation.
Yeah, well, thank you, Alon. That was impressive. It's been said before. Let me share my screen. Yeah, I'm formerly known as MX10, with a label which I've done DJing for about 20 years and worked in all kind of contexts from a small town. And since a few years, I moved to the big town, and with my friend David, I founded the Node Institute, which you might know organizes meetups, events, online courses, and generally tries to create opportunities for the visual programming community. We don't only do that for TouchDesigner, but also for V4, and we're trying to expand a bit in the future. Yeah, when Bileam asked me if I want to join this meetup, I was a bit like, oh, system architecture. I have to say I have a strong love-hate relationship to system architecture. And especially since I do Node Institute, I don't have that much opportunity to build bigger systems. So the topic is kind of far from me. So I don't have like super recent projects which show impressive system architecture. And to be honest, if it has to be impressive, I would these days go to people like Wieland or maybe Matthew, if he would be sitting in Berlin, or Mickey, who have the technological depth, logic thinking capability, and all these positive properties that I seem to lack to run out really big system architectures. On the other hand, of course, I have a lot of love for them because they enable us to do amazing things. So I dived a little bit into what there is to love about system architecture and when do you really need to think about it. And of course, it's stability. If you go to the edges of a hardware system without a thought through, very well designed system architecture, performance will always be an issue. And so that can get that out of the way. Of course, scalability is a topic. If you build something for a small stage and you perform it yourself, you can get away with all kinds of sloppinesses, and sometimes that's also really maybe the better way. But if things get big, if there has to be a lot of hardware connected to it, a lot of output, a lot of people involved in the project, then of course you need a professional system architecture that would also allow you to collaborate in a bigger team. So if it's done well, a lot of people can work on a project at the same time, and they can, move parts ahead without destroying what other people are doing at the same time. So this is not necessarily an easy thing to set up in TouchDesigner. It's actually painful, at least for me. But of course, it opens up these possibilities, and in the professional world, these are necessary. There is the idea that if you do it right, you can reuse a lot of things. I remember seeing a talk by Matthew, maybe haven't quite understood it right, but at the time it struck me that they basically configure computers, they all get the same software, and then per project they get told what role they have to play, and so on. Of course, this doesn't make sense if you have like 1 gig every 5 months, but if you deploy one project after the next, the overhead of productivity you get by not doing things over and over again. Great. Another topic would, of course, be maintenance. So if it's not a one-off gig, but the thing has to run over 5 years, which is a long time in digital media, it has to be, people have to be able to maintain it who haven't written it. So again, the thing needs to be understandable, but also so stable and clearly defined that a person can jump in, can be taught on the project, and can take it over. And overall, that would make for a sustainable workflow if you have a bigger entity to run that has to do these things over and over and over. So in the end, if you go into the professional world, aka I would say the commercial world, because in the commercial world, there's this idea of perfection, right? So there is no acceptance for, oh, the frame rate just went down for 2 frames, or there's a flicker on that pixel. Independent of what mindless marketing bullshit, low quality content there actually may be, there's this idea that that crap has to be super perfect, and it's not acceptable that there's any fault. So that's why I would say this kind of professional is in the commercial world, because in other professional worlds, maybe the focus is somewhere else, and a little fluctuation in frame rate is perfectly acceptable. So why do I hate system architecture? And I mean, that's kind of my personal path, right? I think I still feel that my best artistic touch designer work I did when I didn't understand it, when I just got started. And then I watched a lot of Matthew Ragan tutorials, and I kind of got sucked into this idea, oh, you have to do it nice and you have to do it effective. And this is a beauty in its own. So, of course, then I started to take that more serious. But what I ended up then experiencing, okay, I'm building now this idea of a software that has functions for all the eventualities. And it's not TouchDesigner anymore, but it's my own interface, it's my own software, it's really great. And then again, we have some logic problems, something just doesn't work as you want. So you have to do a long research. So in the end, you spend a lot of time building an all-purpose system And then you realize, okay, now I have got 1 day to make the content. So while, of course, this is enjoyable to build these mechanisms and satisfying, also frustrating at times, I felt that it takes away more and more time that I can actually spend into being creative and focusing on the content. Then having worked with systems by people like Wieland and Mickey who can do these really stable, great, scalable, and all the professional property systems, and then you look at this big thing which you don't understand anymore if you're not them, and then there's like a little part which is marked green that says, Stefan, here you can do something. It's like, and then there's all this red stuff which says, don't touch this. In no case touch this. Maybe carefully have a look into this. So to me, this bigger system architectures, they need a very, very clear defined use case, and then they can deliver that very precisely. But if then you have this very artistic urge of, oh, actually, I want to put in a little bit of feedback here, and I want to do this, and then how can I do this? Yeah, you cannot do this because the system is not built for that. So it takes away this what's really beautiful about touch design is that you can improvise, that you can quickly fix something. You have a quick idea, you just sketch it out, you drop it in somewhere, and somehow it works. And I find that these very sophisticated systems greatly hinder that thing that actually makes TouchDesigner beautiful and lovable. And that's why I'm quite critical about it. It takes away the flexibility, it takes away the speed of changing something because you're so dependent on your much more capable system architect who might not have time to do the fix when you just want to do quickly something. And overall, it takes away the experimental aspect of it. And it does all that for good reasons, but I feel it's bad for making art in the sense of this kind of art where you explore the tech with also let the software guide you a little bit and so on. And that's why I hate it. But I know that structure is good. And so as I also mainly am teaching now, I see a lot of beginners and like the crazy networks and the stuff that I'm also not a fan of because I think they're also hindering creativity. So I find there's a few things that I use in every project that I also recommend to everyone because they're not super difficult, but they can make a big impact. So I think at the forefront of that is the component workflow because that also helps you thinking. So to say, break down what the project has to do in single blocks, which are not hyper complicated, because that also is just better for oneself to think about it. Well, if you look at the huge mountain, it's like, I'm never going to be able to climb that. But if you break it down in a few smaller mountains, the respect isn't as big and you have a feeling of more agency. And there I find an important credo is that a component should kind of work as a node. So it should be self-contained. It should also work. Maybe that's not true for a bigger architecture, but for me, it should kind of also work outside of the context. So if there's no incoming, there should be something that's inside the component that replaces it so you don't open it somewhere else and it's all full of errors. I think custom parameters are super helpful to just extract what is really important inside that component, put it to the outside so you don't have to dive in and find it. And also, they enable you to work with a preset engine, which I find is the quickest way to get order to the chaos. So you can build all kinds of weird stuff, you package it, you extract the meaningful parameters, and then you preset them. At least when you're building a show, I found that is the shortcut to get agency over, also to be able to enjoy the chaos, but to get agency over it in a very fast way. And another tool that I also recommend to anyone is the scene changer, even though recently, it doesn't really solve the VRAM problem. It kind of comes up if you have lots of scene switching, and I always felt like it should do that. but it's still a lot better than having tons of compositions, having to switch them on and off. Of course, a revolution have been annotations, which allow you to document what you're doing to yourself, because when you're in the flow, everything makes sense. 2 months later, like, what the heck was I thinking when I was doing that? I have no idea. So annotations are really great to structure, and they're also a super help in teaching, obviously. I make a lot of use of timers, also as a very relatively simple way to get structure into something that started out as chaotic. And I kind of like replicators. Maybe not in the sense of, I also see using people replicators that replicate replicators to build whole structures automatically. But in the sense of, a good example is one big system architecture mistake I was making once. There had to be a few movies had to play it back. And I thought, okay, I have to build the mother of all movie players, which loads it all from the hard disk, and it could be hundreds of movies, and found myself deep in beyond my competences of what you all need to do in preloading and and unloading, and constantly Marcus on the phone. Marcus, can you save me? I have no idea what I'm doing here. It actually turns out all over it had to be 5 movies had to be loaded. So of course today I would just replicate them in. I would have all of them always loaded. As long as I have enough VRAM, I wouldn't even start thinking about building that monster. So, and that's of course something for replicators. Then another thing that I find super nice to do in TouchDesigner and important is the simulation. So if you work on something that goes into the actual space, it's very useful to simulate it. A, for previs, B, to have your own idea, and of course TouchDesigner won't give you the photorealistic previs that you maybe need to sell it to advertising, but to understand what's going on, it's perfectly fine. And last but not least, of course, a clean network is just helpful for the brain. And I think these things are beneficial for everyone, and you don't have to be a super trained software developer to understand those. Yeah, like I said before, the thing where I would now say you're very well off to outsource that to people who do this all the time, because it's just, at least from my standpoint, usually having an independent production, usually not having big teams, basically having to carry all the load myself. I think it makes sense to think of TouchDesigner as a team sport and to say, well, there's people who are deeply into these topics and try to get them on board if there's a possibility. And that's when it's working with big teams, when that comes along with it, when all the content has to be externalized to be able to get version control, it when it's super hardware heavy, when there's lots of players involved, when there have to be multiple deployments, because if the same installation has to start in 5 different cities at the same time, of course, it's super helpful if it is on GitHub. If you have a big amount of automation, so if a show has to run over years in a museum and it has to boot up and it has to do this and has to do this, but again, it has to have a very precise scenario, because it's kind of the worst case if you have one description of a project, you start working, and then 2 weeks before deployment, everything changes, then this huge system architecture might actually be exactly what makes every single step super difficult. So it's really important to find the balance. So rules that I have for myself and also tell beginners is, if you can do it with nodes, do it with nodes, because that's why you're in TouchDesigner. And that's something that I feel very nice that Markus Heckmann also always says that, who I think is very gifted and knows a lot about TouchDesigner, but he also says, I wouldn't work with TouchDesigner if I had to write everything in Python. Like, what's the point? You have the nodes. If it's not crazy difficult with nodes, and of course there are cases where a script is much better, do it with nodes because it's more readable and you stay true to the tool. Another important question is actually, how often will you need this? again, against this, I really like to make this complicated clockwork, but yeah, it solves a problem that I could otherwise have solved very fast, and I only need to solve this once. So what the fuck did I do there, building this Leviathan? And always good advice is keep it simple, stupid. And I personally, I mean, this is all a bit directed to me because I fell into the trap of making things way too complicated and then hating myself for, having to deal with all kinds of problems that in the aftermath just weren't necessary. And then finally, also, do you really need to program something in TouchDesigner when there's other software that can handle it already perfectly? So I see a lot of people kind of building something like Resolume in TouchDesigner. And of course, you can have the argument, yes, I have complete control. I can integrate it better. I already paid $600 for a TouchDesigner license. I don't want to pay for another software. But the question is, the bigger a system becomes, the more maintenance it is already. And I think there are a few impressive projects in the TouchDesigner world where the people who build it are just like, oh my God, I need to open source this because this is impossible to maintain as a single person. Well, if you have something like Resolume, there's a lot of people doing that already. If you build your own VJ software, of course, that's all coming down to you. Every update, everything always comes back to you. So I think these are just 3 examples. Like Resolume can do a lot of things that can be difficult to achieve in TouchDesigner, but they can work well together. Screenberry, I haven't had the experience yet, but I really like that they have a timeline interface, that they're very media server, very previous, but they can also play back TouchDesigner files. So if the alternative is to build all that functionality yourself, or maybe that license is actually not that expensive and it can handle your content and a lot of other stuff, maybe that's the better choice. And the same is, of course, we can do sound in TouchDesigner, but I think everybody had their pain doing that. So why not just doing it in another software that is made for sound and let those two talk together? All of this is more kind of advice for the personal path. If you're like a 500 people company, it's a different game, but I'm always talking from the independent perspective. To round things off, I would just show 2 or 3 examples of my system architectures, if we still have time. Yeah. Not too deep because I don't think they're very good examples. More like maybe to illustrate that I don't reuse things a lot. I build it every time anew because every time I think, oh, I've learned a lot of things in the past, so now I'm going to do it better. And then every time I have a kind of a new approach which has pros and cons. I feel like it keeps me fresh as an independent developer to do these things over and over. And some things I can do very fast now. So this is a project where it's a fashion show. It's over 30 collections because it's a competition, and basically for every collection, I have audio reactive visuals that I perform live that are fed from footage that comes from the participants of this competition, and it has to switch very fast. I still try that on my top level. I only have a few components. I usually have a window set up for studio and a window set up for show so that I can preview things in the previous, or I can immediately switch to, okay, now I'm in show, now I run it on the outputs. I make usually excessive use of the TouchDesigner preset manager together with the queue list when it's about shows, because again, that allows me to very quickly program a show. And of course, here I use replicators to read in whole folders of content. And again, I kind of learned that if you can do it, just load it all, and then it's there. It's a question of your resources, but if your resources allow you to do it, then just load all the stuff in there, and then don't bother to reload anything during a show. This project was kind of interesting because well, it was a 3D mapping, but course, you have the building and everything not there most of the time that you're working. So I built a previous situation also to give myself this certainty that I can actually do it live, because live there's not much time. So in the software had the 3D scan of the building, and all the projection could already be mapped with CamSnapper in TouchDesigner. So there's only a few things that you have to set up differently to map a 3D model in TouchDesigner than in reality. I think it's mainly one button in the CamSnapper that has to change, and so I could practice this mapping process several times until I know all the issues. Also, this was basically meant that other VJs could perform live on stage, send it to TouchDesigner as a 4K capture, and then all the mapping and everything was done in TouchDesigner. This worked pretty well, except for, I don't know, some signals just didn't come, but that was more on the event technician side. Also nice in this, I used the projector component from Richard Burns, Projector Previs, which is really cool for these kind of projects. I can only recommend it. And down here you see a little component that says Content Monday, right? Because it was always talked about, yeah, you do Saturday and you do Sunday, and then suddenly it was like, and I was already leaving on Monday. So I was like, oh yeah, on Monday we have this thing, and could you just have some content, like while everything was running already. So basically, almost while the show was running, I could program an extra component with some generative visuals and a timer that they could just plug in on Monday, and that would run automatically. And that's the kind of flexibility that I think needs to be there in a project if it's not too big, that this unexpected things can happen and you can just quickly react and, you know, after Germany would say, nochmal was dran flanschen, quickly weld something onto the wagon while it's rolling. This project was like an LED sculpture, so you had these LED strips. They could also rotate to a certain degree, and this was once an installation. A second iteration was also done with students, so there were lots of different stuff. There was test content coming from TouchDesigner. There was videos to be played back. So it had video content, it had generative content, it has test content, it had to control the motors and so on. And I tried lots of different approaches. In the end, that was my control interface where I could switch between all those different things, where I could run shows on a timeline, or I could jump right in and so on. And I'm a huge fan of using just custom parameters for my interfaces. They have a few downsides, but compared with all the widget and whatever button stuff, this is incredibly fast to just use them and then use what's it called, a select comp and put them together to an interface. I think it's usually all there is, and the big advantage is you can still use it like TouchDesigner. No? If you quickly want to put an expression into a parameter, you can do that. This will be a lot harder if you make it glossy with widgets and so on. So unless it's a client or audience-facing interface, I think there's no need for anything else but custom parameters. Another example where I was running several projectors and the lights on a very low budget in a kind of DIY situation. So the interface had to be put together very quickly. So here's a part where I can control lights, again with preset engine, where I can control my cues. And then there's always something like a master and things you can do by hand, and the previews for the 3 projectors also, they fit onto one screen. Again, a mixture of procedural scenes and videos and so on. I think that was handled through the scene changer, who makes that kind of easy to mix that different content types. And luckily the resolution, thanks to the DIY, the resolution was quite low, so no issues in terms of loading and unloading stuff. Maybe last, I think it's maybe the last one. This is something, one of those projects where lots of people worked on it and which was deployed in 3 different cities. So I wasn't doing the major system architecture. I was just doing parts, but it had that fun aspect that you had this objects running around here, this belt, and when they went through the boxes, an RFID check would be realized, and then it would trigger certain content. And I have this mainly here because this was an example where I think Daniel Dalvovo made the system architecture for everybody, and then people on different level could contribute to components. And inside that components, you were quite free, so there was no overload of this has to fulfill all these conditions to work. But it was great because then on the deployment date, this thing was running in 3 major German cities. And of course, if the guys in Hamburg found a bug, they could just run it to GitHub, and in Munich and in Berlin, we could download and update. And so there's no, without this kind of architecture, this would have been super painful, lots of phone calls and whatever. And yeah, I want to take the opportunity to say that we finally managed to release the first courses of our winter season. There's still a bit of work done on the TouchDesigner. Not intermediates anymore, we call them professionals now, because who the hell knows what an intermediate is? We realize the range is huge, but professional means you earn money with it. But our popular TouchDesigner beginners class is already online. And with this little advertising break, I want to thank you, first of all, Bileam, for having me. Then, of course, Matthew, for all the things that I've learned from him over the years. Thank you for that. And hello to everybody in the audience that I know.
Thank you. That was lovely. Great overview of this system
Super
architecture.
informative.
And yeah, it's also very satisfying to just see your networks because they're so clean, organized. And I totally agree on the whole like balancing thing of building a system architecture and having that kind of tough back end part, and then on the other side kind of being an artist and wanting to express freely. But I also think that's the great thing about TouchDesigner, that you can actually fuse both of these parts, even though sometimes it's a bit tough to do the first one. And I'm one of these people doing making their own VJ software, so it's funny to hear from you. But I mean, the thing is that I would generally, I totally agree with you, but I would generally advise people still to do like big projects like this, because I think this was the project, because I also built it from scratch like 5 times now, or I'm in the process of building it 5th time. I think that this was the project I've learned most about TouchDesigner and about like optimization, about system architecture, about what things run well and what things don't run well. So I'm not saying people should make their own Resolume necessarily, but I think generally having this kind of big project which might be your own, because then you have more time and less stress maybe, is a great way to learn for sure. So that would be a counter argument, but generally I agree. You don't have to build everything in TouchDesigner, but I kind of do actually.
But it's so fun.
I think
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, I think let's meet at the point: A, it's fun; B, it's necessary to learn; but 3, you should also come to conclusions. And maybe what I presented was my personal conclusion.
Totally.
So I'm not saying that's true for everyone.
Yeah, no, it's a good point.
With your experience, maybe we should listen to you.
Yeah, maybe later on. Let's now continue with Matthew Ragan. Last but not least presentation, and then we'll go to the questions part.
Excellent. Well, hello everyone. Thank you for having me. Wild to be last in this incredible lineup. Thank you both, Alon and Stefan. It's always so interesting to hear from other people and what they're doing, what they're working on, and some other perspectives. And also to think about where the overlap here is. for some of the things that I'll talk about today. So I'm not going to show too many networks, I don't think. I have some kind of like bigger general principles that I want to kind of share today with all of you. I think some pieces just to like give you a snapshot of who I am for those people that watch this later on. If you haven't don't know me inside the community, I have worked with TouchDesigner now for over 10 years. That's weird to say. I used to work at Obscura Digital. We were acquired by Madison Square Garden. I worked on MSG Sphere, which was a wild experience in its own right. And then I'm a co-founder of a small studio called Pseudomagic. Right now, and we also use TouchDesigner pretty heavily in a lot of the projects and the work that we do. I don't think I need to say any more of that for this crew, but for the future and when people come back to this and watch it on YouTube, they'll have some sense of who I am. So I think the big question that I want to start with is, what is a system? Like, we talk about system architecture, and I think often we get kind of lost in this idea that, like, you know, it means a particular thing. And I think that's one of the places that I want to kind of start, is that when we talk about systems, what is it that we mean exactly? Like, do we mean the stack of servers that's in a closet somewhere that have like a very nice professional faceplate on them? Do we mean the show system that is like some mountain of cables that, like, who knows what connects to what and where it goes? Is it the single laptop that's running a kiosk? Right? Like, there are many different ways that we might think about systems and try and understand our relationships to them. We, you know, build lots of different things with TouchDesigner. And so in this context, I kind of want to take a step back, and I don't want to necessarily think about a system as a collection of machines or a collection of applications or any of those types of pieces. We kind of like zoom out for a second just to kind of hold in our minds the idea that when we talk about how we're going to organize a system architecture, that's not just necessarily like the hardware or the processes. That often is kind of how we're organizing our ideas. Today, I'm going to mostly talk about this in the context of, like, it's a laptop or it's a stack of computers. So we're not going to kind of do the system architecture idea of like, this has got to run to the cloud, and that talks to a front end, and the front end then talks to the database, and the database talks back to the. We're going to kind of, you know, put a like pause on that kind of like bigger idea when we're thinking about really big kind of complex systems for like enormous deployments, and we'll focus instead just on like the idea that, like, I'm going to build something in TouchDesigner on just my single laptop or maybe on a few servers, but take for a moment the kind of suspension of, we're going to work with, you know, the whole internet and all of cloud infrastructure. My kind of first guiding principle here usually is that you have to sketch first. And this, I think, comes partially from one of my design professors. It's so strange. You know, once upon a time, I was a graphic designer, and then I was an actor, circus performer, and now I find myself in this weird kind of like software engineer space, creative technologist. Life is weird. But I think one of the pieces that's kind of really stuck with me, especially from my early design instructors, was the emphasis and importance on sketching first. And we were using the Adobe Suite for this particular set of kind of creative exercises. And my design professor would not let us touch any of our digital tools. We weren't allowed to interact with any of the machines inside of the studio space until we had completed a sketch. We had to present a sketch. We had to go over the sketch, our kind of series of sketches with our instructor before we were allowed to start actually working with the digital tools themselves. And that was really a not only valuable exercise, but it helped instill in me the idea that one of the pieces that's really critical for us to embrace is the idea that we have to make a plan first, because if we just sit down with our creative tool, it's really easy to get lost, like Stefan mentioned, in the enthusiasm of building the clock without really understanding what you're building the clock for. And so with that in mind, like when I say that, you know, sketch first, I don't kind of mean this silly stable diffusion, kind of like I'm going to sit down, I'm going to make a drafting, drawing kind of sketch. The kind of sketching that I really mean is starting to map out, what does your experience look like? What are you trying to achieve? What are your goals? What is it that you actually want to accomplish with the system that you're building? And I think that, one of the pieces, again, as Stefan mentioned, that's really important is that we can get lost really easily inside of the Touch Designer experience and kind of being swallowed by the enthusiasm of creating the perfect tool for a particular job, or wanting to forget about the kind of creative pieces that are really valuable and important to us. And so it's worth kind of taking a moment to map out, how do the things connect together? Is TouchDesigner going to be responsible for the audio in this project? Or am I going to use Ableton? Is there going to be another machine that I can talk to that's going to broker the audio? And taking that opportunity to kind of decide what's doing what and where responsibility lives inside of your project, kind of outside of the context of your TOE file, is really important and will help you kind of set some of the ground rules and context for what it is that you're going to do and how you want to build the thing that you're actually working on. So what is it that you sketch, right? You sketch system diagrams, hardware layouts, what your interaction mechanics are. I think, sometimes it's really easy for us to sit down and say like, oh, well, the user's going to interact with this, part of the experience over here. Okay, well, does that mean that we're using RGB camera? Is there a Femtube bolt? Is there an old school connect? Is that a point cloud? What does that interaction look like? Do we need to build anything for that? Are those things that we can actually rely on with other tools? Like, let's define what those kind of boundaries are so that we have some kind of lines to color inside of. Other important things there to think about are, right, like, what's the development cadence? How many people are on the team? How are you going to divide up roles and responsibilities? Those are also really important things to kind of sketch out and understand how you're going to divide up work. And if you're a solo developer, right, which it's not uncommon that we find ourselves in those situations, that might also look like, all right, how much time can I actually devote to building the kind of like back-end superstructure for this? And how much time do I need to reserve for creating the content and actually thinking about the creative parts of this? Because, one of the things that I've learned probably the hard way myself in many scenarios is that a project will take as much time as you give it. So if you give a project 8 months, it will take 8 months to do it. If you give that same project, if you only have 2 months to do it in, you'll probably find a way to do it in 2 months. It might be a very messy network, but you'll still find a way to do it. So giving yourself some constraints there are really important. The other pieces to think about there, right? Like, how are you going to think about versioning? Do you need to think about versioning? How are you going to deploy it? How are you going to maintain it? And I think to Alan's point, a really kind of critical thing here also to think about is who owns the code that you're actually working on, because that might inform whether or not you're using components and tools that you've can reuse from other projects, or it might kind of constrain you to building fresh things that are just for this client because they're going to own the whole thing after it's done. Some of the kind of big important questions that I think are really critical here at the kind of ideation phase, as you're kind of outlining how you're going to work, is this permanent or an event? Because, again, to the points of Stefan and Alon, is sometimes we don't have to build the perfect thing if we're only going to use it one time, or if there's, if we're only playing 6 videos, like, I don't need the perfect video loader to be built for this project. Like, I want that deeply in my life, but this, that might not be the right time to solve that problem. Does this installation need to live without any intervention for the next 8 years? And are other people going to load content into it? And are they going to interact with it in ways that I can't predict? I might need to build a video loader. So understanding the kind of constraints of where a project lives will help set the stage for answering some of these really important questions for you. Do you need any cloud infrastructure? Does it have to talk to the internet? That will change some of the ways that you work. Is this an on-prem single server or multi-server configuration? Is this a laptop that someone brings and takes away? How the kind of like hardware kind of topology lays out will also have a lot of impact on the way that you think of building. And the last one there is the IP ownership. Again, who owns this code? Or who owns which parts of this code? Because maybe the way that you've kind of worked out your agreement with the project or with the client is going to be that they own a license to it. So really, like, you can put things in there that you reuse, or maybe they're going to repackage it and resell it as an experience, in which case you want to make sure that everything in there is kind of fresh and theirs to own forever. Okay, so building with TouchDesigner, what does that look like? I think there's some kind of important pieces here that are really helpful in the kind of architectural standpoint for what it is to kind of build projects inside of the kind of world of a TOE file. The biggest one that I kind of really hold on to really fiercely, I think, in my own life, and I'm excited to see that other people feel the same way, is to give yourself some standard. So adopt some set of rules. And for example, Stefan's kind of example of use components, use annotations, right? Like you need some ground rules to steer you away from the temptation of doing everything in one flat part of your network where it's a impossible kind of collection of noodles that run on top of one another. Use comments and annotations. They're an incredible feature that's been added to TouchDesigner. It's like one of the most valuable pieces that I find inside of the environment these days. Another big recommendation is that any mission critical data, my preference, my recommendation is that you store that data in external files. Because I don't want to inadvertently save the TOE file and then for the state of the TOE file to somehow break a project that's deployed. If there's a collection of presets, if there's a collection of configurations, anything that's mission critical for the project to work, I want to put that in an external file because I don't want to be in a condition where because I hit Control S, I've now suddenly broken it and I don't know why I broke it. I think it's also really valuable here to pick and document your environment version. So which version of TouchDesigner are you using? If you do 1 gig a year or 2 gigs a year, this might not matter so much. But if you're doing lots of gigs or if you're responsible for something that's going to be deployed for some long period of time, understanding, oh, right, I built that with 11.6 whatever is really valuable. Or if you're in the circumstance where you found a bug and Derivative has given you a fix, and you have like the special Snowflake installer, that's also incredibly valuable to know because when you go to update your TouchDesigner version, that might break something. I also like in my projects to give myself a sandbox. So we might have like a very structured kind of TOE file kind of layout, but we also always have another directory that's inside of our repositories. That's our sandbox. And that's a kind of anything goes space. That's the place where we get to experiment and try different ideas. And we don't have to adhere to any of the rules that are inside of the way that we're deploying the project. And that's really important because it gives you a kind of experimentation and sketch area where you can kind of like dream of anything being possible and then figure out how that can adhere to the rules of the system that you've built. And the last thing that I'd recommend here is that you anticipate disaster. Things will go wrong. That's like the name of the game. And so if you prepare yourself for the reality that like you're going to get on set and then there's not going to be any fucking Wi-Fi and you're going to be like, oh my God, I need Wi-Fi. Just having thought ahead about like, oh, something will go wrong. I should like, give myself an extra 20 minutes in my setup is really helpful. And we'll go a long way in helping make sure that you don't lose your mind when you're actually working on a project. Okay, setup. What does setup look like for us? So to give you kind of a snapshot, we have kind of 2 layers of our projects that we start with. So we have this concept that we've called scaffold. This is our reusable network. And so anything inside of this top layer of scaffold, so our shader library, our Python, our reusable kind of TouchDesigner Python stuff that we use across all projects, our templates, our tools, that all lives here at the highest level of our project. And this is available for any of the projects that we create. So anything that's kind of project specific lives inside of this idea that scaffold. And anything here at this top level is kind of reserved as we should anticipate that that's available in any project forever. We use this idea of submodules in GitHub. If you're really excited about version control, I'm happy to talk about that more. But the kind of big idea there is that you can have a kind of snapshot of a set of pieces from another repository. So you have a reliable way of knowing like, oh, that version of those tools is what I'm using for this project. Inside a scaffold, we have typically this same set of 8 operators that find their way through every project. We have a startup that holds just our simple like the execute script that runs when TouchDesigner starts. It's just kind of neatly tucked away inside of a base so that it's hidden and kind of tidy. We use internal parameters quite a bit. So internal parameters, I'll talk about them in a little bit later, but this is essentially our store of settings for our project. So this is where anything that's kind of essential for the project to operate lives. Anything that deals with communication out to other machines or other processes lives inside a COM. Process is where we do any kind of processing work. So if there's any kind of computation that's going to happen, that tends to live in process. And data is a store of data that's available regardless of the machine that starts it. Output's our last one, and output is typically the component that's variable depending on which project we're running. When we decide whether or not we're working in a multi-machine or single machine environment, that's where we make some decisions about how we're going to start up. If we're only working with a single machine, then we try to keep the project much simpler and less convoluted than if we're running across many different servers. It becomes a little bit more precarious when you're starting to run multiple instances or multiple machines. And so that's where the architecture gets like a little squishier in the TouchDesigner world. But generally speaking, this idea of an output should be mutable and should kind of adapt to, is this an output that, or a machine that has, you know, one display connected to it, 4 displays connected to it, is it a broadcast card, etc. One of the other big things that I would recommend just as a kind of guiding principle in terms of when you're thinking about building with TouchDesigner is to centralize state. And that can look like custom parameters or internal parameters. Internal parameters are a subset of the custom parameter idea. IPARs, if you're not familiar with them, absolutely Google them on the TouchDesigner wiki, because they're a really great way to have essentially what's a set of private variables for a component. So you use the IPAR syntax to get to them, so you don't have to know the parent shortcut or the op shortcut to get there. And they're kind of available all the way down through the structure of your project, which makes it really easy for some component that's 8 layers down to be able to get to an IPAR. The idea here, so I've been working with Flutter a little bit lately, which is another kind of project framework. And one of the concepts there is this idea that you lift state up. And the same kind of principle holds here. So essentially what that means is you want to pull the idea of what you're controlling up to as high as is appropriate inside your project, so that something at the top level of your project doesn't have to reach all the way down to find something that's kind of available centrally. That's really, really valuable and really critical in a lot of different ways for a lot of different projects. Because it also makes it way easier to synchronize content from a single component out to, say, a web interface or out to file or any of those things. If you do a lot of Python work, dependency objects are a really excellent interface for working with extensions to be able to create components that will cook whenever their members change. So if you're in the Python universe, dependencies are hugely, hugely valuable in your project, because it helps you avoid the situation where you have to know what's using a parameter and make sure that it's cooked, and kind of a lot of the other gymnastics you might need to do there. Some kind of high-level tricks and reminders here. So custom pars that are built from a reference par will automatically inherit all the properties. So what does that mean? That means if you have the parameter customization dialog open, and you drag a parameter from an operator to the build a custom par interface, it'll grab all the things like the min, max, the menu options, all of the pieces that are from the source operator. And that is like a huge time saver. Examples there would be like, I want to know that from my, I want to pick a font to set for some text component or text top. Well, if you grab that parameter from, say, the text component or the text top, then you get all of the system fonts that are available, and you don't have to build that list yourself. Big reminders here: binding pushes both directions. Those are really helpful when you have a UI and you need to maintain the kind of pairing between the UI state and the parameter state. References can include Python. So binding can't include Python in many circumstances, right? I can't do like some operator +1. References do let you do Python operations inside of them. So if you need to do some other kind of complex operation or mathematics inside of a parameter, a reference will often give you some of that flexibility that you might not find with binding. And exports, one of my like secret favorite things about exports is that there's a mode for setting exports or you can use the path syntax parameter. So if you're doing like, let's say you have 18 lights inside of your scene. I don't know why you'd have 18 lights, but let's say you have 18 lights and you don't want to drag and drop the references for every single one. You can do the path to the operator : and then the name of the parameter that you want to target, and then hit the little export button on your chop, and it will push all the parameters out to them, so you don't have to build those yourself. It's really helpful with pattern expansion kind of techniques inside of channel operators. So that's like a huge time saver. Don't forget that you can dock ops. So, you know, just like you see operators that are docked to other operators, like for example, your table DAP with your ramp top, you're also allowed to dock operators to other operators. So using docking is a great way to build those kind of spatial relationships to make sure things are tethered together. This is really helpful for executes when you want to make sure that that panel execute or that chop execute stays close to the operator that it's paired with. And then the other thing here I like to hold on to is that selects are almost better, always better than in and outs whenever you need to do complex routing, because selects can be dynamically set by path as opposed to needing to add ins and out operators through many layers to build those connection relationships. So there's a lot that you can do with selects that's like a lot easier, in my opinion, than just connecting operators with wires necessarily. Okay, I know I'm going fast on time, so I'll try not to spend too much time in the extension universe, but a lot of times for situations where you're doing a lot of logic, extensions become a kind of critical part of how you're thinking of working inside of TouchDesigner. There is actually a not miserable way to set up your Python project inside of TouchDesigner, so your extensions will autocomplete and you'll get type hints out of them. If you've ever worked with a kind of coding environment that's not TouchDesigner, and you've found that kind of autocomplete or code completion piece is helpful, I absolutely recommend taking the time to make sure that you structure your extensions in a way that let you get code completion from your text editor, from your IDE, because it will make your life way, way easier. And it's worth doing. It's a pain to set up, but it is worth doing. Object-oriented programming, right? Like when you're working with extensions, that's a big part of what you're doing is you kind of created a class object that you're using with that operator. This is a lifelong journey. Expect it to be a lifelong journey. I keep learning things about OOP, even though I feel like I've done this for 18,000 years is what it feels like sometimes. A companion to object-oriented programming is this idea of functional programming. So if you use modules on demand, or another good example there might be like the TDU module, right? That's very functional. You put something in, you get something out, and that's all it is. An object, a class object, has some sense of memory and continuity. And knowing when you want to use one or the other can be really valuable because you might build a set of functions or a store of functions that are really helpful for you that don't need any sense of who they are, where they are in the network. They're just going to, take something and give something back. Which might be different than an operator that has parameters that needs to perform some other kind of logical operations. If you haven't Googled the term design patterns, this is a really great place to do a little bit of exploration. So Google design patterns, because there's lots of different solutions to different problems that you encounter inside of building systems, and other developers have talked about it. And so you'll see different models about the way that you actually build and think about your systems by looking at the way other developers have done this. And that's really helpful. On the pure Python side of this, build a reusable and portable library of code. Like, I can't stress enough how happy you will be to not have to write that hex to RGB function every time you make a project. If that just lives inside of your library that you can throw inside of your project, and like there's always a function that lets you do that, there's like a huge value to be able to have something like that that's portable. The other thing to really take a look at is type hinting and code completion. If you're not using type hints yet inside of your Python work, I recommend dipping your toes in that water because it will really help the way that you think about working with code and writing code. Okay, this is what I really want to make sure that I talked about, so I'll try to speed through some of these things. I know I'm a little over Bileam, so I'll try to make sure my deep dark secrets
No
are
worries,
concise.
I really want to hear
These are
that.
my favorite. These are my favorite TouchDesigner brain busters that still to this day surprise me. The movie file in top has a parameter called the file open timeout, and if you set this timeout to 0, the movie file in top will not block the operation of TouchDesigner. What does that mean? That means that you can load a large asset that's pulled from the internet asynchronously from the main project inside of TouchDesigner. So if you want to say like build a spinner or a loader while you're waiting for a file to load or come back, you don't have to go through the kind of like Herculean effort of preloading, or I've got to download this file somewhere locally and then load the downloaded file. You can let the movie file in wait until it actually resolves and then return the file to you. And exactly what's in the chat right now, like you can load files directly from a URL to actually pull things from the web. This is like a game changer in the way that you work inside of TouchDesigner, especially if you're kind of accustomed to the idea that you can have something that will load in the background and then appear when it's ready. And so the kind of partner to that, like that one still like blows my mind a little bit, is the oninitialized callback. So the timer chop has an oninitialized callback, and this callback is really interesting because what it will do is it allows you to run a check before the timer starts. Right? So like this is really valuable because it gives you the ability to essentially approach the idea of asynchronous, where I want to actually run some check to see, am I ready to advance? I want to display a spinner. I want to load something in the background. I want to wait for some other process to complete. And I don't know how long that's going to take. Well, you can let that and use the timer to check at the interval of your choice, check every frame, check every 10 frames, and then start once that's completed, or once that true false function has returned. That's like, for the web folks who are like, why can't I do asynchronous things in Touch? Well, there is a way to do some of that kind of asynchronous adjacent kind of work that will really change the way that you build interfaces, or think about how you kind of build operations, or think about how you tell a user that you're waiting for something to complete. The point file in top and the point file in pop both have a very special magic trick, which is they can load OBJ files. I sometimes see folks forget that you can load OBJs or CSVs with these operators. So you have a way to get that geometry directly onto your GPU without having to load it as a SOP, convert it from a SOP to a chop, and then from a chop to a top, do that conversion, and then align everything. Right? The other kind of like magic trick there is that you get the UVs from that OBJ. So if you have kind of a corresponding texture, you can align a bunch of that stuff up. You can remap it, which is really fast and really cool and really fun. This is like, I see folks miss this one, and it's one of my favorites. Another one that always catches me, that's like it's like the thing I stub my toe on, it feels like every day, is time slicing. So many operators are not necessarily are set to be time sliced, even though they can run without time slices. So an example, right, is like the trigger chop. 9 times out of 10, you want to pulse the trigger chop and you want to get that attack, sustain, decay curve, right? I want to hit it and see the curve. If I want to edit the curve and understand what that looks like, I don't want to hook it up to a trail and like click it 6 times while I try to figure out what that looks like. Instead, you can turn off time slicing. You can see the whole curve of what the animation is, make your adjustments, and then turn it back off, and then reliably understand what that's going to look like. Similarly, the logic chop, like we often think of the logic chop as only dealing with single samples, but if you turn off time slicing, you can perform logical operations on multiple samples. So if you've ever been in the scenario where you played the game of like, I'm going to unshuffle that thing so I have a bunch of channels, and then I'm going to perform some operation, and then I'm going to reshuffle it, there's a good chance you probably don't have to do that. Just check the time slice parameter on your operator. And then one of my favorite ones, Alon, this one's for you. The global resolution multiplier that's set in your parameters, the preferences for your computer, or for your TOE file, allows you to set if you want to up the resolution or turn down the resolution. So when you're working, so for example, I worked on a project where the plates that we were working with were like 15K by 4K. They were a pain. When I'm working on my laptop, right, it has like a 3070 in it. There's no way that I'm going to be able to load the project. So in that case, what I do is I set the global resolution to 1/4, and that turns down the resolution of all the operators to just 1/4 of their resolution. I don't actually have to like build the mechanics of setting operators. I don't have to maintain a kind of like idea of resolution in my project. I can rely on TouchDesigner to actually just quarter the resolution of everything without me having to set it, which is a huge game changer and a huge time saver also. There are gotchas. I think like quickly some gotchas to just like put in your mind. Be careful with replicators. They're super handy. They're great in a lot of circumstances. If you're running replicators that replicate in the middle of your project while they're running, there is a good chance that that will slow down things inside of your project. So for example, like I love Stefan's example of I've used a replicator to load all my assets. Chef's kiss. Excellent use of replicators. What I've done in the past and have been really sorry about is I'm going to load that bin of files. I'm going to go to a new scene and I'm going to load a different bin of files. During that transition where I've destroyed all the operators and I'm recreating all the operators, right? That's a good place where things are going to freeze. I'm going to like, my system will slow down. Python will get you. It's there are tricky bits in the Python universe, so just be careful when you're doing really big, long, complicated things. Like I see sometimes folks take an image, convert it to a NumPy array. From the NumPy array, they compute something on it. They convert it back to some true/false statement, and then they get it out of a function, and then they call that in a parameter, and that parameter cooks every frame, and then all of a sudden their frame rate is 3. Know that just like Python, there's a good chance Python's going to block the main thread inside of TouchDesigner. So just be judicious with what you're doing and thinking about kind of like, especially when it comes to like big, complicated pieces that you're doing in Python. A good kind of solution for that is if you have something that's, you know, takes an indeterminate amount of time to complete, you may want to run that as a separate process and then communicate with it. And that's not crazy to do. In fact, you can use subprocess. The subprocess module to then actually just launch another Python process and communicate with it. Or you can potentially, you know, run that into an engine and get it out of the engine. Windows, this is my favorite tricky bit to recommend to folks for Windows. If you're deploying on a Windows installation, Windows exclusive particularly will bite you in a really weird way, which is on some versions of Windows, if you have output a image that is edge to edge on your screen, Windows exclusive mode will take over, and that may sometimes cause weird stuttering or tearing in your graphics. It's a weird thing. It's super hard to reproduce. It is like one of the pieces that has like bitten me more times than I can care to say. A good trick is just reduce your resolution by 2 pixels. So just give yourself a 1 pixel border around your whole project. That's not ideal, but if you're short on time for troubleshooting what the problem is, just punching in 1 pixel sometimes will fix that for you.
Do you mean on the output or on your UI?
Both. So if you're
Both.
running Windows, so Windows does this silly thing where like if I'm edge to edge on a display, not through so like not a broadcast card, for example, but through the actual display output, there's a not zero chance that for some reason you'll tear unexpectedly, or your frame rate will misbehave. And so if you see that, before you tear your hair out, kind of like interrogating every operator and every render network inside your project, try just like booping the resolution down 2 pixels and see if that fixes you. I'm not going to talk about kind of like the wide world of Git. There's a lot to talk about in terms of like Git and submodules and automation, right? Like I could go on about that for longer than probably anyone has the stomach for. But that's kind of like a high-level snapshot of some of the things that I try to think about or try to kind of communicate with others when it comes to building systems, thinking about building systems and all the like.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. There was a lot of
You're
stuff
such an
to,
angel. You're
yeah,
such an angel, really.
a lot of stuff to take in. I will definitely come back to the recording myself. Quite intimidating as well. The how you set up your system there. And we need more tutorials from you again. So much good stuff that you just know from experience, even just these tips. So thank you for that. And I will now stop the recording. So to the YouTube people, thank you for watching.